Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step quietly into the pale cold darkness of the open plains where the land stretches farther than your eyes can hold and the sky still belongs to the night. You lie wrapped in a rough wool blanket, the ground beneath you, firm and unyielding, carrying the memory of yesterday's heat that has long since faded into a creeping chill. Somewhere nearby a horse shifts its weight, leather creaks softly, a low murmur of cattle drifts through the dark like a slow-breathing tide. And you are a cowboy now, not the kind from the movies, not the clean version with a perfect hat tilt and a heroic soundtrack, but the real kind. The kind who wakes up sore, smells faintly of smoke and horse, and quietly wonders how long a body can keep doing this before it simply refuses. You probably will not survive this comfortably. That is not meant to sound dramatic. It is simply the truth of the work. The days are long, the pay is uncertain, and the land does not care about your plans. But there is something else here too, something steady and grounding, something that keeps you pulling the blanket a little tighter and opening your eyes instead of turning away. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and the local time where you are listening. It is always a quiet comfort to know where these stories travel. Now dim the lights, you do not sit up right away. For a moment you stay still, listening. The fire nearby has burned down to a low glow, its warmth barely reaching you now. The air has that thin biting quality that settles just before dawn when the world feels paused between night and morning. Your breath rises in faint clouds. Your fingers tucked beneath the blanket feel stiff and slow. A commonly accepted understanding of cowboy life in the 1870s is that the day began well before sunrise, often around 4 or 5 in the morning, austerely during cattle drives. Time was not marked by clocks so much as by light weather and necessity. And necessity out here does not wait. You shift slightly and your muscles answer with a quiet protest. It is not sharp pain. It is deeper than that. A dull, steady heaviness that seems to sit in your shoulders, your back, your legs. Yesterday's ride has not left you yet. Neither has the day before that, or the one before that. You pull the blanket aside. The cold meets you immediately, slipping through your clothes, pressing against your skin. You sit up slowly, giving your body a moment to adjust. Around you shapes begin to emerge from the dark. Low bedrolls, a few scattered figures already moving. The faint outline of the chuck wagon a short distance away. Someone coughs. Another man mutters something. You do not quite catch his voice, still thick with sleep. There is no rush in the way people move, but there is no hesitation either. Each motion feels practiced, quiet, almost automatic. You reach for your boots. They are not where you left them. For a brief second there is a flicker of confusion, then you remember. You placed them upside down last night, a small habit meant to keep scorpions, insects, or anything else from settling inside. It is a small detail, but one that matters. Out here, comfort is rare, but avoiding unnecessary trouble becomes its own kind of skill. You shake the boots gently before slipping them on. They feel stiff, still holding traces of yesterday's dust and sweat. The leather creases as you stand, adjusting slowly to your movement. You roll your shoulders once, then again, as if you might loosen something that has decided to stay tight. Nearby the cook is already at work. You can smell it before you fully see it. Coffee, strong and dark, rising in a steady bitter scent that cuts through the cold air. It drifts across the camp, reaching each man in turn, pulling them a little more fully into the morning. There is a quiet understanding among cowboys that the cook is one of the most important figures on the trail. He feeds you, keeps the routine steady, and in many ways holds the entire operation together. There is an old saying passed along in different forms that a cowboy might argue with his boss, but never with the cook. You step closer to the fire. The warmth feels immediate, almost startling against your chilled hands. You hold them out, palms open, letting the heat sink in slowly. The flames crackle softly, sending small sparks upward into the fading dark. A lesser-known detail of cowboy life is that many cowboys slept directly on the ground with only a bedroll often consisting of blankets wrapped in a canvas sheet. There were no tents on most cattle drives, no real shelter unless the weather turned severe. The sky was your ceiling, whether it was clear storming or filled with wind. You glance upward now. The stars are beginning to fade, their sharp brightness softening as the first hint of dawn approaches. The horizon carries a faint line of grey, barely noticeable, but enough to signal that the night is ending. Somewhere beyond the camp, a cow lows softly. It is not a loud sound, not urgent, but it carries. The herd is still there, still gathered, still part of your responsibility. That thought settles quietly in the back of your mind. The work has not started yet, but it is already waiting. You take a tin cup from near the wagon. The metal is cold in your hand, and you fill it with coffee, watching the dark liquid ripple slightly with the movement. When you bring it to your lips, the heat surprises you. It is strong, almost harsh, but it wakes something inside you. Not just your body, but your awareness. You are here. Another man steps beside you, nodding once in greeting. There is not much conversation yet. Words come later once the day has found its rhythm. For now, there is only shared presence. The quiet understanding that each of you is doing the same thing, feeling the same stiffness, breathing the same cold air. There has long been discussion among historians about how romanticized the cowboy image became compared to the reality. Some argue that the mythology formed almost immediately, even as the work itself continued. Others suggest that the gap between image and truth widened over time, shaped by stories, novels, and later film. Standing here now with cold hands and tired muscles, it's difficult to imagine anyone calling this glamorous. And yet there is something here. You take another sip of coffee. The fire crackles. The sky lightens just a little more. The shapes around you become clearer, more defined. A saddle rests on a nearby post. Coiled rope hangs loosely, waiting to be used again. A horse snorts softly, shaking its head as if impatient for the day to begin. You realize slowly that this moment matters. Not because it is exciting, but because it is steady. It is the beginning of something that will repeat day after day with only small changes. And in those repetitions, you begin to understand the rhythm of this life. You set the empty cup aside. Your hands are warmer now. Your body feels more awake, though the heaviness has not entirely left. It probably will not. Not today, maybe not tomorrow either. But you step forward anyway. The camp is stirring more fully now. Men moving with purpose, the quiet beginning to shift into low conversation, into preparation. The herd waits beyond the edge of the firelight, a dark, shifting presence that will soon demand your full attention. And as you take another breath, feeling the cold air fill your lungs, you sense the day opening ahead of you. Long, demanding, unpredictable, and already you are part of it. The light grows slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the land itself is not in a hurry to begin again. You stand near the fire a moment longer, feeling its warmth fade as you step back into the open air. The grey line along the horizon softens into pale gold, and with it the camp shifts from shadow into something more solid. Shapes become objects, movements gain intention. The quiet dissolves into the low, steady sounds of work beginning. Your stomach reminds you that it has been a long time since yesterday's supper. You move toward the chuck wagon, drawn again by the smell of coffee, and something heavier now, something baked or fried. The cook stands behind his setup, already surrounded by simple tools that seem to carry more importance than they appear. A cast-iron skillet, a battered pot, a wooden box filled with supplies that must last the length of the drive. A widely accepted detail of cattle drives in the 1870s is that the chuck wagon served as the mobile kitchen and supply centre, often designed with clever compartments for food utensils and even medical basics. It was more than a wagon. It was the centre of daily life, a place where routine held everything together. You take your place in line without being told. There is no need for instruction. Everyone knows how this works. The men ahead of you step forward one by one, receiving their portion with a nod or a brief word. No one lingers. No one complains, at least not out loud. When your turn comes, the cook hands you a tin plate, biscuits, beans, a strip of salt pork that glistens slightly in the growing light. It is not a feast, but it is enough. Out here, enough is what matters. You move a short distance away and sit on an overturned crate. The biscuit is dense, a little dry, but it softens with each bite. The beans are warm, steady, familiar. The salt pork is strong, its flavour lingering longer than you expect. You eat slowly, not because you're trying to savour it, but because your body seems to demand a certain pace, as if rushing would somehow waste the effort it took to prepare it. Nearby Sasson makes a quiet remark about yesterday's ride. Another answers with a short laugh, the kind that carries more fatigue than humour. The conversation drifts, touching briefly on weather, on cattle, on the condition of the trail ahead. It is not lively, but it is not silent either. It sits somewhere in between, shaped by shared experience more than enthusiasm. A lesser-known detail about cowboy meals is that, while they often seem repetitive, cooks took pride in making small variations when possible, adding dried fruit spices, or even simple desserts when supplies allowed. These small changes could lift morale in ways that went far beyond the food itself. You finish the last of your plate and wipe it clean with a piece of biscuit. Nothing is wasted, not here. You return the plate without needing to be asked. The cook gives a brief nod, already focused on the next task. There is a quiet respect in that exchange, unspoken but understood. Without him, the entire operation would falter faster than most people realize. You take another cup of coffee. It is slightly cooler now, but still strong. It settles into you, spreading warmth that feels almost like energy, though you know better than to expect too much from it. This day will ask more than coffee can provide. You turn your attention to your gear. Your saddle rests where you left it, its weight both reassuring and demanding. You run your hand along the leather, checking for cracks, loose straps, anything that might cause trouble later. A saddle that fails on the trail is not just inconvenient. It can be dangerous in ways that are difficult to fix once the day is fully underway. You lift it carefully. The weight settles into your arms, familiar but never light. You carry it toward the line of horses where the remuda waits under the watchful eye of the wrangler. The animals shift and move, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Each horse has its own temperament. Some stand quietly. Others flick their ears, watching every movement with alert attention. You recognize a few from yesterday, recalling how they move, how they responded. That memory matters. Choosing the right horse for the day is not just preference. It is strategy. You reach for the one you rode before. It turns its head slightly as you approach, not resisting but not entirely welcoming either. There is a balance here, a quiet negotiation between you and the animal. You speak softly, more out of habit than necessity, your voice low and steady. A curious detail often overlooked is that cowboys frequently rotated horses throughout the day to prevent exhaustion, sometimes riding several different mounts during long drives. This practice helped preserve the strength of the animals, which were as essential to the work as the men themselves. You begin the process of saddling, blanket first adjusted carefully to sit flat against the horse's back. Then the saddle lifted and placed with a controlled motion that avoids startling the animal. The cinch follows, tightened gradually. Not too fast, not too loose. Everything here depends on balance. You check it once, then again. There is no harm in being certain. Around you the others are doing the same. The soft sounds of leather, the quiet murmurs to horses, the occasional clink of metal fittings coming together. It forms a kind of rhythm, steady and focused, a preparation that feels almost ritualistic in its repetition. There has been long-standing discussion among scholars about how skilled cowboys truly needed to be compared to the simplified portrayals in later media. Some suggest the work required a deep practical intelligence built from experience rather than formal training. Others argue that while the basics could be learned quickly, true mastery took years of daily repetition. Standing here now, adjusting your saddle for the second time, it feels clear that this is not something easily faked. You tighten the cinch one final notch. The horse shifts slightly, reacting to the pressure, then settles. You rest your hand briefly against its neck, feeling the warmth beneath its coat. There is a connection there, quiet but real. You will depend on this animal today just as it will depend on you. You gather your rope. It hangs coiled at your side, ready but still. You test its weight, its balance. Like everything else, it must be right. Small problems have a way of becoming large ones once the herd is moving. The sun has begun to rise now. Light spreads across the plains, revealing the full shape of the land. The herd becomes visible in the distance, a slow shifting mass that seems almost part of the earth itself. The day has arrived whether you feel ready or not. You place your boot in the stirrup. For a brief moment you pause, not out of hesitation but awareness. This is the point where preparation ends and action begins. You swing up into the saddle. The leather creaks beneath you. The horse adjusts, finding its balance with you on its back. From this height, the world looks slightly different, wider, more exposed, more demanding. You take a breath. The taste of coffee still lingers. The warmth of the fire has faded. What remains is the work ahead. And as you turn your horse toward the waiting herd, you feel the quiet shift from mourning into motion. You guide your horse forward at a slow walk, letting it settle beneath you before asking for anything more. The camp fades behind you, shrinking into a loose cluster of shapes and smoke, while the herd ahead grows clearer with each step. What seemed distant in the dim light now reveals itself as a restless, breathing mass of animals, each one shifting, turning, adjusting to the growing day. The sound reaches you first, a low, uneven chorus of hooves pressing into dry ground, of quiet calls passing from one animal to another, of movement that never fully stops. It is not loud, not in a way that demands attention, but it fills the space completely. Once you notice it, you cannot ignore it. You ride closer, easing your horse into position along the outer edge. No one tells you exactly where to go. There is no shouted instruction, no clear line drawn in the dust. Instead, there is an unspoken understanding among the riders. Each man drifts into place, forming a loose boundary around the herd. You begin to see how it works, not as a rigid formation, but as something flexible, adjusting constantly to the movement of the cattle. A well-established historical observation is that cowboys often worked in assigned positions during a drive, such as point rider, flank rider, or drag rider, each with specific responsibilities. The system helped keep the herd moving in the right direction, while preventing strays and maintaining control without constant commands. You are not at the front today. Instead, you find yourself along the side where the work is quieter but no less important. From here, you watch for animals that drift too far, for sudden changes in direction, for signs that something might shift the herd's mood. It feels simple at first, just riding, just watching. But the longer you stay, the more you realize how much attention it requires. A single cow edges away from the group, not far, just a few steps. But it is enough. You guide your horse in a gentle arc, closing the space without rushing. There is no need for speed. In fact, speed would make things worse. The goal is not to chase, but to guide, to suggest a direction rather than force it. The cow turns back, rejoining the others. It's a small moment, almost forgettable, but it carries weight. Do this 100 times, 1,000 times, and you begin to understand the rhythm of the work. It is not about grand actions, it is about constant, careful adjustments. A lesser-known aspect of cattle behavior is that cows tend to follow leaders within the herd, often older or more confident animals, and managing those individuals can influence the movement of the entire group. Cowboys learn to recognize these patterns, using them to steer large numbers of cattle with minimal force. You shift in the saddle. The motion is subtle, but your body notices it immediately. The stiffness from earlier has not disappeared. It has simply settled into the background, becoming part of the experience rather than something separate from it. The saddle creaks softly as your horse moves beneath you, each step steady and predictable. Dust begins to rise. At first, it is only a faint disturbance along the ground, stirred by hooves and drifting lazily in the morning light. But as the herd starts to move more fully, the dust thickens, lifting into the air in slow rolling clouds. It clings to everything: your clothes, your skin, the inside of your mouth. You taste it without meaning to. Dry, fine, persistent. There is no avoiding it, not out here. You pull your bandana up slightly, covering part of your face. It helps, but only a little. The dust finds its way through anyway, settling into the small spaces that cannot be sealed. Nearby, another rider gives a low whistle. Ooh. It is not a signal in the way you might expect, more of a habit, a quiet sound that seems to carry just enough presence to influence the animals without startling them. You begin to notice these small things, the way voices are used sparingly, the way movement is controlled, measured. Everything here favors calm, There has been ongoing discussion among historians about how much cowboys relied on instinct versus learned technique. Some believe the work became second nature over time, shaped by repetition and necessity. Others argue that what appears to be instinct is actually a deep accumulation of small observations built slowly through experience. As you watch the herd respond to the slightest shift in position, it feels less like instinct and more like quiet understanding. The sun climbs higher. Its warmth spreads across your back, easing some of the morning chill, but bringing with it a new kind of discomfort. The light reflects off the dust, creating a hazy brightness that makes it harder to see clearly over long distances. You narrow your eyes slightly, adjusting without thinking. Time begins to stretch. Minutes feel longer out here, marked not by clocks but by movement and repetition. The herd moves. You follow, you adjust, you wait. There is a rhythm to it, steady and unbroken, that seems to slow everything down. And yet there is always a sense of readiness beneath it. At any moment something could change. A sudden noise, a shift in the wind, a single animal breaking into a run. You keep that awareness with you, not as fear but as a quiet layer beneath your thoughts. It keeps you alert even as the work itself feels almost meditative. You glance towards the front of the herd. The point riders guide the direction, their movements subtle but deliberate. They do not pull the cattle forward so much as encourage them, creating a path that the animals choose to follow. It is a delicate balance, one that depends on patience more than force. A curious tidbit sometimes mentioned in accounts of cattle drives is that cowboys occasionally sang or hummed to the herd, especially at night, to keep the animals calm. The sound, low and steady, helped prevent sudden panic, reinforcing the idea that quiet presence could be more effective than loud control. You consider that now listening to the sounds around you, the steady hooves, the low calls, the soft creak of leather. It forms its own kind of music, one that does not need to be added to. Your horse flicks its ears. It senses the herd as much as you do, responding to movement, to tension, to subtle changes that you might miss. You begin to trust that awareness, allowing it to guide your own reactions. There is a partnership here, quiet but essential. You adjust your grip on the reins. Not tight, not loose, just enough to communicate without interfering. The rope at your side shifts slightly with the motion, a reminder of tools you may or may not need today. The land stretches endlessly in every direction. There are no clear boundaries, no fences, just open space and the path you are trying to follow. It feels both freeing and overwhelming at the same time. Out here, you are responsible not just for yourself, but for a moving, unpredictable mass that does not always cooperate. And yet you continue, one step at a time, one small correction after another. The dust rises, the sun climbs, the herd moves forward, and you move with it. The herd begins to stretch forward, not in a sudden rush, but in a slow gathering motion that feels almost like a decision forming. You sense it before it fully happens, a shift in weight. A few more animals stepping with purpose. The quiet drifting of earlier turning into something more directed. You guide your horse slightly inward, adjusting your position as the line of riders subtly reshapes itself. No one calls out orders, and yet the movement becomes coordinated. The riders at the front angle gently ahead, creating a direction that the cattle begin to follow. Along the sides, you and the others maintain a steady presence, not pushing, not crowding, but holding a boundary that suggests where the herd should remain. An established historical understanding notes that cattle drives often moved at a slow pace, typically around 10 to 15 miles per day, to prevent the animals from losing weight before reaching market. Speed was not the goal. Condition was. A thinner herd meant lower profit, and every mile had to be measured against that reality. You feel that slowness now. It settles into your body, into the rhythm of your horse's gait, into the steady repetition of hooves pressing into earth. There is no urgency in the movement, but there is no stopping either. The day unfolds forward, one careful step at a time. Dust rises more heavily as the herd gathers momentum. It drifts upward in soft rolling waves, catching the sunlight and turning the air hazy. You taste it again, even through the cloth at your face. It settles into your throat, dry and persistent, a reminder that this environment leaves its mark on everything it touches. You shift slightly in the saddle, easing pressure from one side to the other. Your legs already feel the work, even though the day has barely begun. The constant balancing, the small adjustments, the need to stay aligned with your horse, all build into a quiet strain that never fully disappears. A single steer breaks a little too far from the line. You notice it quickly this time. Without thinking, you guide your horse outward, cutting across at an angle that brings you alongside the animal rather than behind it. There's no need to chase, just presence. Just enough pressure to suggest a return. The steer hesitates. Then, as if reconsidering it, drifts back toward the herd. You let out a slow breath you did not realize you were holding. A lesser discussed detail from trail life is that experienced cowboys often prided themselves on correcting problems before they became visible to others. The work was measured not by dramatic action, but by how little disruption reached the rest of the crew. You begin to understand why. The moment passes almost unnoticed, swallowed by the larger movement of the herd. No one comments, no one needs to, the work continues. The sun climbs higher, warming the ground beneath you. The early chill fades, replaced by a steady heat that settles across your shoulders and down your back. Your hat helps, but only so much. Sweat begins to form, slow at first, then more steadily soaking into your shirt where it will remain for most of the day. Flies gather. They hover around the cattle, drawn by movement, by scent, by heat. The animals respond with flicks of their tails, with subtle shifts and restless motions that ripple through the herd. You watch closely. Irritation can turn into agitation if it spreads too far. A nearby rider lifts his voice slightly, not shouting, just enough to carry. Easy now. The words seem almost unnecessary, and yet they fit. The tone matters more than the meaning. Calm, sterile, unhurried. The kind of sound that keeps things from tipping too far in the wrong direction. There's been long-standing disagreement among researchers about how much control cowboys truly had over large herds compared to how much they adapted to the animal's natural behavior. Some suggest that cattle drives were as much about following the instincts of the herd as guiding them. Others believe skilled riders could shape movement more precisely than it appears. Riding here now, it feels like a balance of both. You adjust your reins slightly. Your horse responds immediately, shifting direction with a quiet willingness that you are beginning to trust. Its ears flick back toward you, then forward again, always listening, always aware. The land stretches wide on either side. Low grasses ripple in the breeze. The horizon remains distant, unchanged, as if the world itself has decided not to move no matter how far you travel. There are no clear markers, no obvious signs of progress. Only the slow, steady passage of time measured by the position of the sun and the feel of your body. You glance back briefly. The line of riders holds, spaced out in a way that feels almost instinctive. Each man watches his section, his small part of the whole. Together it forms something larger, something that keeps the herd contained without ever fully enclosing it. A quiet, often overlooked fact is that many cattle drives depended on teamwork more than individual skill, with each rider's consistency contributing to the overall success. One person acting out of rhythm could disrupt the balance, creating gaps or pressure that the herd would quickly respond to. You turn forward again. The herd moves, the dust rises, the sun continues its climb. Time stretches, then folds back into itself, marked only by repetition. You guide, adjust, watch, again and again. The work is not dramatic, it does not announce itself, but it demands your attention all the same. Your back tightens slightly. You roll your shoulders trying to ease it, but the relief is brief. This is not the kind of discomfort that disappears. It settles in becoming part of the experience, something you carry rather than avoid. A breeze moves across the plains. It lifts the edge of your shirt, cool for a moment before the heat returns. It shifts the dust, clearing your view briefly before the air fills again. Small changes like this become noticeable, even more meaningful when the larger pattern remains so constant. You take a slow breath. The smell of earth, of animals, of leather and sweat fills your lungs. It is not pleasant in the way people might imagine, but it is real, grounded, honest. You are no longer thinking about camp, no longer thinking about the fire or the blanket or the quiet before dawn. That part of the day has already slipped behind you, replaced by the steady forward motion of the herd. And as you ride, adjusting again to a slight shift along the edge, you begin to feel it more clearly. This life is not built from moments of excitement. It is built from hours like this. Slow, demanding, unbroken. And you are right in the middle of it. The morning settles into something steady and unchanging, the kind of rhythm that feels almost endless once you are inside it. The herd moves forward at its measured pace, and you move with it, your horse stepping in quiet agreement beneath you. The land does not shift much. The sky remains wide and open. The only real change comes from the sun, which climbs higher and begins to press its warmth more firmly onto everything below. You notice it first along your neck, a slow creeping heat that builds beneath your collar, spreading outward until it reaches your shoulders and down your back. Your shirt, already damp from earlier effort, begins to cling more closely to your skin. The fabric does not dry. It simply adjusts, holding both sweat and dust in a way that becomes familiar far too quickly. A broadly accepted detail of trail life is that cowboys often spent 10 to 12 hours a day in the saddle, during drives sometimes longer depending on conditions. The work was not divided into neat shifts. It stretched across the daylight hours, demanding constant presence with very little real rest. You shift your weight again. The saddle offers no real relief. It supports you, yes, but it does not soften the experience. Every movement of the horse travels upward through your body. Every uneven patch of ground adds a small jolt that settles into your muscles. Over time, these small things gather, forming a kind of background fatigue that never quite leaves. Your mouth feels dry. You reach for your canteen, lifting it carefully as your horse continues its steady pace. The water inside is already warm, carrying the faint taste of metal and leather, but you drink it anyway. Slowly, measured, there is no knowing how long it must last. You lower it again, securing it in place. The herd shifts slightly to your left, not dramatically, just enough to require your attention. You guide your horse in a smooth arc, maintaining the invisible line that keeps the animals together. The motion feels more natural now, less like something you have to think through step by step. A small detail sometimes overlooked in descriptions of cowboy life is how much of the work relied on anticipation rather than reaction. Riders learned to sense changes before they fully happened, adjusting early to prevent larger problems from forming. You begin to feel that instinct taking shape. It is not complete. Not yet. But there are moments, brief and quiet, where you notice something just before it becomes obvious. A shift in the way a few cattle turn their heads. A tightening in the movement of the group. Subtle signs that something is changing beneath the surface. Flies gather more heavily now. They cluster around the cattle, drawn by heat and scent, forming small clouds that drift and reform with each movement. The animals respond with growing irritation, tails swishing more frequently, heads tossing slightly. The motion spread through the herd in uneven waves. You watch closely. Irritation can become agitation, and agitation, if left unchecked, can turn into something far more difficult to control. A rider further down the line nudges his horse forward, closing a small gap. You follow the example, adjusting your own position to maintain the flow. It feels less like individual action and more like a shared response. Each of you reading the same signs, making small corrections that keep everything balanced. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how much communication occurred between cowboys during drives versus how much was simply understood through observation. Some accounts suggest that silence was often preferred, allowing riders to focus on the herd rather than on conversation. Others indicate that brief signals and sounds played a larger role. Experiencing it now, the quiet seems intentional, even necessary. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. Dust gathers there again almost immediately. It settles into your teeth, into the corners of your lips, into the small spaces you cannot fully clean. There is no escaping it, only enduring it. Your horse exhales sharply. You feel the motion through the saddle, a reminder that it is working just as steadily as you are. You lean forward slightly, patting its neck once more out of habit than any expectation of response. Still, the gesture feels right. The ground beneath you shifts from firm to slightly uneven. Your horse adjusts without hesitation, its steps careful, controlled. You trust it more now than you did earlier, relying on its awareness as much as your own. The partnership grows in small ways built from repeated moments of shared effort. The sun continues its climb. The light becomes stronger, more direct, casting sharper shadows beneath the cattle and along the folds of the land. The air feels thicker, heavier, as if it carries the weight of the day along with the heat. You glance toward the horizon. There is no clear end in sight, only distance. Only the path ahead marked not by visible signs but by the slow movement of the herd and the direction set by the riders at the front. A rarely mentioned observation from trail accounts is that many cowboys described a sense of monotony that could feel almost hypnotic, where hours blended together and the mind drifted even as the body remained engaged. It was not boredom exactly, but something quieter, a steady repetition that shaped the experience in ways difficult to explain. You begin to understand that feeling. Time stretches. The work continues. You guide your horse, again correcting a slight drift along the edge. The motion is smoother now, more fluid, as if your body has started to accept the pattern rather than resist it. The sounds remain constant. Hooves pressing into earth. The low murmur of cattle. The faint creak of leather. The occasional call of a rider, soft and measured. Together they form a backdrop that feels both steady and unhinging. You take another breath. The air is warm now, carrying the mixed scent of dust animals and sun-warmed grass. It settles into you, becoming part of the experience rather than something separate from it. You realize slowly that this is the work, not the moments of sudden action or danger, though those may come. Not the stories told later shaped into something sharper or more dramatic. This, the long hours, the steady pace, the quiet attention, the dust in your teeth. And as you ride on, adjusting once more to the subtle movement of the herd, you feel the weight of it settle more fully into place. This is what it actually feels like. The herd carries its own kind of quiet language, and you begin to hear it more clearly now. Not in words, not in anything spoken, but in the way movement passes through the animals like a slow ripple. One shifts, then another. A head lifts. An ear turns. The pattern builds in small pieces, each one easy to miss if you're not paying attention. You lean forward slightly in the saddle, narrowing your focus. At first it all seemed the same, a mass of bodies moving together without distinction. But now you start to notice differences. Some cattle walk with a steadier pace. Others hesitate, drifting at the edges as if uncertain. A few seem to influence the rest their direction, quietly shaping the movement of those nearby. A well-recognized point in historical accounts is that experienced cowboys learned to read these subtle cues, identifying which animals tended to lead and which were more likely to stray. Managing those individuals could guide the behavior of the entire herd with far less effort than trying to control every animal at once. You watch one steer near the front. It moves with quiet confidence, rarely breaking its line, rarely hesitating. Others seem to follow its path without needing encouragement. You make a mental note of it, not because you were told to, but because it feels useful. Your horse shifts beneath you, adjusting to a slight change in terrain. You let the reins move gently in your hands, giving it the freedom to choose its footing. Trust builds in moments like this. Small repeated confirmations that the animal knows what it is doing. The herd tightens slightly. It's not a dramatic change, just a subtle closing of space between the animals. The movement becomes a little more compact, a little more focused. You sense it as much as you see it, a quiet tension forming beneath the surface. You guide your horse outward, easing the pressure. The goal is not to force the herd apart, but to give it room to settle. Too much closeness can lead to restlessness. Restlessness can lead to sudden movement. You begin to understand how easily one state can turn into another. An often overlooked detail from cattle drive journals is that cattle are highly sensitive to pressure, both physical and perceived, and even the positioning of riders can influence their comfort level. Cowboys learn to adjust their distance carefully, maintaining a balance that kept the herd moving without creating stress. You feel that balance now. It is not exact, not something you can measure, but it becomes clearer with each passing moment. Stay too close and the animals react. Drift too far and gaps form. Somewhere in between there is a space where everything flows more smoothly. A calf lets out a higher, sharper call. Its sound cuts through the lower tones of the herd, drawing your attention immediately. You glance in its direction, watching as it moves quickly to rejoin its mother. The moment passes, but it leaves a trace of awareness behind. Small disruptions matter. You adjust your position, again keeping your horse aligned with the edge of the herd. The motion feels more natural now, less like a series of separate actions and more like a continuous response. There is a kind of quiet concentration that settles over you. It is not intense in the way of urgency, but it is steady. Your thoughts narrow to what is in front of you. The movement of the cattle, the feel of the reins, the rhythm of your horse's steps. Everything else fades slightly. A curious observation, sometimes mentioned in personal accounts, is that cowboys developed a near instinctive sense of timing, knowing when to act and when to wait without needing to think it through consciously. This sense did not come quickly. It built over time, shaped by repetition and the consequences of getting it wrong. You are not there yet, but you begin to feel the edges of it. The sun continues its slow climb, now high enough to cast a stronger light across the plains. Shadows shorten. The colours of the land shift from soft morning tones to something brighter, more exposed. Heat settles in more firmly. Your hat shields your eyes, but the light still presses in from all sides. You squint slightly, adjusting again without fully noticing the motion. The herd drifts a little to the right. You catch it early this time. With a gentle nudge of your heels, you guide your horse forward and inward, closing the space before it widens. The movement is smooth, controlled, almost effortless compared to earlier attempts. The cattle respond. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough. The line corrects. The drift slows, then stops. You feel a small sense of satisfaction. Not pride exactly, just a quiet acknowledgement that you did something right. There has long been discussion among historians about how much of cowboy skill was taught directly versus learned through observation and experience. Some suggest that formal instruction was limited, with new riders expected to pick up techniques by watching others. Others argue that mentorship played a larger role, especially on well-organised drives. Standing here, it feels like a mixture of both, shaped as much by what you see as by what you're told. You glance toward the other riders. Each one moves within his own space, making small adjustments, responding to the same shifting patterns. There is a shared awareness that connects the group even without constant communication. The land remains open and unchanging. No fences, no clear markers, just distance stretching in every direction. It gives the impression that you are not moving at all, even as the hours pass and the herd continues forward. You take a slow breath. The air is warmer now, heavier with dust and the scent of animals. It settles into your lungs, familiar and unavoidable. Your horse flicks its tail, brushing away flies. You feel the motion through the saddle, a small reminder that it experiences the same environment you do. The same heat, the same irritation, the same steady effort. You lean forward slightly, adjusting your posture. The movement helps, but only for a moment. The underlying fatigue remains quiet but persistent. Still you continue, watching, guiding, adjusting, listening to a language that has no words yet speaks constantly. And little by little you begin to understand it. The land ahead darkens in a way that feels out of place. At first it is only a faint shift in colour, a deeper tone cutting across the pale stretch of grass and dust. Then you see it more clearly. A line of trees, low, uneven, clustered along a shallow dip in the earth. And beneath them something that does not move like the rest of the plains. Water. You feel the change ripple through the herd before anyone speaks of it. Heads lift. Ears turn, the steady forward motion begins to hesitate, not stopping, but loosening in a way that feels uncertain. The sound shifts too. Hooves no longer press in a uniform rhythm. Instead, there is a scattering, a slight disorder as the animals sense what lies ahead. You adjust your seat, your view focus sharpening. A crossing is never just a crossing. A widely accepted point in accounts of cattle drives is that rivers and streams were among the most dangerous obstacles on the trail, not because of their size alone, but because of how cattle reacted to them. Even shallow water could create hesitation, and hesitation could spread quickly through the herd. You guide your horse closer to the edge of your position, watching the line begin to bend. The riders at the front slow their pace, angling the herd toward a narrower section where the banks slope more gently. It is not marked in any obvious way, no signpost, no cleared path. Just a place chosen through experience, through memory, through the quiet knowledge of what works and what does not. The cattle begin to bunch, not tightly at first, but enough that you notice. Their movement loses its smoothness. A few step forward, then stop. Others press from behind, unsure whether to continue or wait. The tension builds in small increments. You feel it in your own body. Your grip on the reins tightens slightly before you realize it. You loosen it again, reminding yourself to stay steady. Your horse senses the change as well, its movements becoming more alert, more responsive. A smaller, easily overlooked detail from trail narratives is that cattle often hesitated at water, not because they could not cross, but because reflections and unfamiliar movement on the surface confused them. The shifting light, the ripples, the sudden change in footing all combined to create uncertainty. You see that hesitation now. The first animals reach the bank and pause. They lower their heads, sniffing, testing. One steps forward, placing a hoof into the shallow edge. It pulls back almost immediately, as if reconsidering. Another follows, pressing closer, urged by the slow pressure of those behind. The herd tightens further. This is the moment that matters. You move your horse outward slightly, helping to hold the line, preventing the animals from spilling too far to the sides. Others do the same, each rider adjusting position in quiet coordination. There is no shouting, no sudden movement. Everything remains controlled even as the tension grows. There is a line of thinking among researchers that suggests experienced cowboys relied heavily on patience during crossings, allowing the herd to work through its hesitation rather than forcing it forward. Others believe that more active pressure was sometimes necessary to prevent dangerous clustering. Watching it unfold now, the balance feels delicate. One steer steps fully into the water. The sound changes immediately. A soft splash. A shift from dry ground to something deeper, less certain. The animal moves slowly, each step careful, testing the bottom before committing its weight. Another follows, then another. The movement begins to spread. You feel the tension ease just slightly as the herd finds its direction again. The hesitation does not disappear, but it lessens, replaced by a cautious forward motion. You guide your horse along the edge, keeping pace. The bank beneath you is uneven, soft in places where the ground gives way slightly under pressure. Your horse steps carefully, choosing its footing with more attention than before. You trust it to do so. The cattle move deeper into the water. Some splash more than others, reacting to the unfamiliar sensation. A few hesitate again, turning their heads, looking for a way back. You shift your position just enough to block that thought, encouraging them forward without forcing it. A brief, almost overlooked note from personal accounts is that once a few animals committed to crossing, the rest often followed in sequence, guided more by herd instinct than by direct control. That pattern becomes visible now, unfolding in front of you. The line forms, not perfectly, not evenly, but enough. The herd begins to stretch across the water, a slow-moving column that carries itself forward. You follow along the bank, watching for trouble. A sudden turn, a slip, a panic that could spread faster than you can respond. Your attention sharpens, narrowing to each movement, each small sign. The sound of water mixes with the steady noise of the herd. It feels different. Softer in some ways, but also more unpredictable. Each splash, each shift carries a weight that dry ground does not. You notice one animal and stumble. It recovers quickly, but the moment catches your attention. You guide your horse closer, ready to respond if needed. The steer regains its footing, continuing forward with the others. The danger passes before it fully forms. Still, the possibility lingers. There is a quiet tension that remains until the crossing is complete. You ride alongside, your focus unbroken, your body aligned with the movement of your horse. Time seems to slow again, each moment stretching slightly as you wait for the herd to clear the water. One by one, the animals reach the far bank. They climb the opposite side, shaking off water, reforming into a loose group as they step back onto dry ground. The line tightens again, the movement becoming more familiar, more stable. You feel the shift as it happens. The tension releases not all at once, but gradually, like a held breath finally let go. You guide your horse forward a few steps, watching the last of the herd complete the crossing. The water settles behind them, its surface smoothing as the disturbance fades. A quiet sense of relief moves through you. Not excitement, not celebration, just the simple recognition that something difficult has passed without becoming something worse. There remains ongoing discussion about how often crossings truly led to major losses compared to how frequently they were managed successfully. Some accounts emphasize danger, highlighting the risks and occasional disasters. Others suggest that with careful handling, most crossings were completed without serious incident. Experiencing it now, it feels less like a dramatic event and more like a test of patience and attention. You take a slow breath. The air on this side feels no different, yet something in you has shifted. A small layer of experience added, a quiet understanding gained. The herd moves on, and you move with it, already returning to the steady rhythm that defines the rest of the day. By the time the sun stands high above you, the world begins to feel heavier. The air no longer carries the freshness of morning. It sits still, thick with heat pressing gently but constantly against your skin. The light has changed too. It no longer stretches across the land in soft angles. Now it falls straight down, sharp and direct, leaving very little space to hide from it. The herd slows almost without instruction. Not stopping, not fully resting, but easing into a pace that feels more deliberate. The energy of earlier hours fades into something quieter, more measured. Even the cattle seem to understand that this part of the day demands a different rhythm. You shift in the saddle, easing your weight once again. Your legs feel heavier now, your knees slightly stiff from holding position for so long. These small adjustments you have been making all morning begin to add up, settling into your muscles in ways that are difficult to ignore. A widely recognized detail from trail records is that cowboys often paused around midday. Not always for long, but enough to allow both men and animals a brief recovery from the rising heat. These breaks were rarely comfortable, but they were necessary to keep the herd in good condition. You guide your horse towards a slight rise where a few others have already gathered. It is not much, just a small patch of ground that offers a better view and perhaps a hint of breeze, but even that feels like a small relief. You swing down from the saddle. For a moment, your legs do not quite remember how to hold you. There is a brief stiffness, a slight hesitation as your weight settles differently than it has for hours. Then it passes, replaced by a dull ache that feels both unwelcome and expected. You loosen the cinch on your saddle, not removing it entirely, just easing the pressure enough to give your horse some relief. It lowers its head slightly, exhaling in a way that feels almost like gratitude. You run your hand along its neck. The coat is warm, damp beneath your fingers. The animal has been working as steadily as you have, carrying your weight without complaint. A small, often overlooked note from first-hand accounts is that cowboys depended heavily on their horses' endurance and temperament, and taking even brief moments to ease the animals during the day could make a significant difference over long drives. You step away a short distance, removing your hat for a moment. The air touches your hair, but it does not cool you the way you hoped. The heat remains settled deep into the day, now unlikely to fade anytime soon. Nearby, a few men sit in the sparse shade cast by the wagon. The shade is thin, barely enough to cover them fully, but it is something. You move closer, lowering yourself to the ground with a careful motion that avoids making the stiffness worse. The earth is warm beneath you. Not hot, not uncomfortable, but holding the sun's presence in a way that reminds you there is no true escape from it. Someone passes you a small piece of food. Cold beans, a bit of leftover bread, nothing special, nothing fresh, but enough to quiet the hunger that has been building again. You eat without much thought, your body accepting what it is given. Conversation begins slow and scattered. One man mentions the crossing earlier, his voice low, almost casual. Another responds with a brief remark about the depth of the water, adding a detail you had not noticed. The exchange is simple, but it carries a sense of shared experience. You listen more than you speak. A quiet, lesser-known aspect of cowboy life is that these small moments of rest often became the only time for conversation, reflection, or even humour during the day. The work itself left little room for distraction, so these pauses took on a quiet importance. Someone makes a dry joke, It is not particularly funny, but it draws a few low chuckles anyway. The humour is less about the joke itself and more about the release it provides, a brief break from the steady focus of the morning. You lean back slightly, resting your hands on the ground. The sky above you feels endless, stretching in every direction without interruption. It gives a strange sense of both openness and isolation, as if you are part of something vast yet entirely on your own within it. There is still discussion among historians about how cowboys experienced these long stretches of monotony, whether they found them calming or mentally exhausting. Some accounts describe a sense of peace in the repetition, while others suggest the quiet could become overwhelming over time. Sitting here now, it feels like both might be true. The breeze shifts just enough to move the air. It carries the scent of dust and animals blending with the faint smell of food and leather. It is not unpleasant, but it is constant, a presence that never fully leaves. You take a drink from your canteen. The water is warmer now, less refreshing than before, but it still helps. You take only a small amount, careful not to use more than you need. Your horse stands nearby, head lowered. It rests in its own way, conserving energy for what comes next. You watch it for a moment, noticing how still it can be when given the chance. The herd remains loosely gathered, not fully settled, but calmer than before. The movement has slowed, the tension reduced after the crossing. It is a temporary state, one that will not last once the drive begins again. You know that already. The rest cannot continue for long. You push yourself back to your feet, the stiffness returning briefly before easing once more. Around you, the others begin to do the same, the quiet break drawing to a natural end without needing to be announced. Saddles are checked again, cinches tightened, gear adjusted. Small preparations repeated, not because they were done poorly before, but because everything must remain reliable. A final thoughtful observation from various historical writings suggests that the success of a cattle drive depended less on dramatic skill and more on consistency, on the ability to perform these same careful actions day after day without letting fatigue lead to mistakes. You place your hat back on your head. The sun has not moved much, but the day feels further along now. The pause has passed, and with it the brief sense of stillness. You take hold of your reins. The work resumes as it always does, and as you swing back into the saddle, the rhythm of the trail returns steady and unbroken, carrying you forward once again. You feel the change before you see it. At first, it comes as a shift in the air, a subtle movement that brushes across your face, cooler than before, carrying a faint edge that does not belong to the steady heat of midday. Your horse notices it too. Its ears turn its head, lifting slightly as if listening to something just beyond your awareness. You glance toward the horizon. The sky, which has held its clear, open blue for hours, now shows a darker line in the distance. It is faint at first, almost easy to dismiss, but it grows more defined the longer you look. A band of cloud, low and gathering, stretching across the plains like a quiet warning. The herd senses it. Movement shifts again, not in direction but in feeling. The cattle do not stop, but their pace becomes less even, their attention pulled in ways that are difficult to see but easy to sense. Heads lift more often, ears flick. The steady rhythm of earlier hours begins to loosen. An established observation from historical trail accounts is that weather on the plains could change quickly sometimes with little warning, and that storms posed a serious challenge to cattle drives. Wind, rain, and sudden noise could unsettle the herd in ways that required immediate attention. You adjust your position slightly, keeping your horse aligned with the edge. The breeze strengthens. It moves across the grass in visible waves, now bending it in soft patterns that ripple outward. The dust lifts again, but differently this time. Not rising straight up, but carried sideways, drifting across your path in thin, shifting layers. You narrow your eyes. The light has changed as well. It feels muted, as if something has been placed between the sun and the land, softening its intensity, while adding a new kind of weight to the air. A distant rumble reaches you, low, almost uncertain, but there. Your horse shifts beneath you, its muscles tightening slightly before settling again. You feel the tension pass through it, a quiet reminder that animals often sense changes before they fully arrive. A lesser-known detail from cowboy recollections is that storms were not always feared for their rain alone, but for the way they altered sound and movement across the plains. Thunder, sudden wind, and shifting pressure could create conditions that made cattle restless or unpredictable. You watch the herd more closely now. Small signs begin to appear. A few animals move closer together. Others turn their heads toward the approaching clouds as if trying to understand what is coming. The overall motion becomes less smooth, less certain. You guide your horse inward just a touch, maintaining your line. Other riders are doing the same. No one calls it out. No one needs to. The shared awareness spreads quietly, each man responding to the same signs, adjusting position to keep the herd steady. The wind picks up again, stronger this time. It pushes against your shirt, lifts the edge of your hat, carries the scent of something distant. Not just dust now, but moisture, faint but present. You take a slow breath. The air feels different in your lungs, cooler, heavier, as if it carries more than just heat. The rumble comes again, closer now. There is a line of thought among historians that suggests experienced cowboys developed a deep sensitivity to weather patterns, reading small environmental cues to anticipate storms. Others believe that while some signs were recognizable, many storms arrived with a level of unpredictability that made them difficult to prepare for fully. Standing here watching the sky darken, it feels like both might be true. The first shadow passes over the herd. It moves slowly, stretching across the animals and the ground beneath them. The change is immediate. The light softens. The colours dull slightly. The heat eases, but not in a comforting way. The cattle react, not dramatically, but noticeably. Movement becomes tighter. The spacing between animals decreases. A low, uneasy sound begins to spread through the group, subtle but growing. You shift your weight, readying yourself. This is where the day can turn. You have heard it before in quiet remarks in half-finished stories. Storms that passed without trouble, others that did not. The difference often came down to small things: timing, position, the mood of the herd at the exact moment the weather changed. A small, easily missed note from historical writings is that even distant thunder could unsettle cattle, especially if it arrived suddenly or echoed across open land. The sound carried in ways that made it difficult to place, adding to the animal's uncertainty. You hear it again. This time there is no mistaking it. The sound rolls across the plains, deeper, more defined, followed by a brief silence that feels heavier than the noise itself. Your horse shifts again. You steady it with a gentle movement of the reins, your voice low, barely more than a murmur. The words do not matter. The tone does. Calm, always calm. The wind rises. It pushes harder now, carrying dust and the first faint drops of rain. They are scattered, uneven, striking the ground in small, dark marks that disappear almost as quickly as they appear. The herd tightens further. You see it clearly now. The animals draw closer together, their movement losing the easy flow of earlier hours. The tension builds, quiet but undeniable. You guide your horse along the edge, maintaining your position. Others do the same, the line of riders holding steady despite the shifting conditions. There is a shared effort to keep everything balanced to prevent the unease from turning into something more. There remains debate among scholars about how often storms directly cause major disruptions compared to how often they were managed without incident. Some accounts emphasize dramatic outcomes, while others describe careful handling that kept situations under control. Experiencing it now, the outcome feels uncertain, balanced on a series of small decisions. The rain begins to fall more steadily, not a downpour, but enough to change the feel of the air, to dampen the dust, to alter the sound of movement across the ground. The scent of earth rises, mixing with everything else, creating something new. You keep your focus on the herd, watching, waiting, ready. The day, which had stretched into a steady, predictable rhythm, now feels sharper, more alert. Every movement carries more weight, every sound draws your attention. And as the storm begins to settle over the plains, you understand how quickly this life can shift from routine to something far less certain. The rain does not last long. It passes across the plains in a thin, restless sheet, leaving behind damp patches of earth and a cooler edge in the air that fades almost as quickly as it arrived. The clouds begin to break apart, their darker shapes drifting away and allowing the sun to return in uneven bursts of light. But something has changed. You feel it in the herd. The cattle move more closely together now, their earlier unease lingering even as the sky clears. Their steps are shorter, less fluid, as if they are still listening for something that might return. The ground beneath them, slightly softened by the rain, alters their footing just enough to make each movement more cautious. You guide your horse along the outer line, keeping your distance measured. Not too close, not too far. The balance matters more now than it did earlier in the day. A detail frequently noted in first-hand accounts is that cattle once unsettled by weather could remain sensitive for hours afterward, reacting more quickly to sound or sudden motion. Cowboys had to adjust their behavior accordingly, keeping movements slower and more deliberate to avoid triggering further agitation. You keep your posture relaxed, your hands steady on the reins. Your horse seems to understand. Its movements are smoother now, more controlled, as if it senses the need for calm just as much as you do. The sun dips lower in the sky. It's not yet evening, but the light has begun to soften, shifting from the harsh brightness of midday into something warmer, more forgiving. Shadows lengthen slightly, stretching across the damp ground in uneven lines. The herd continues forward, step by step, quietly. Time stretches again, though it feels different now. Less heavy than before, but more fragile. The steady rhythm has returned, but it carries a new layer beneath it, a reminder that things can change without much warning. You glance toward the other riders. They remain in position, each one maintaining his part of the line. There is less conversation than during the midday break. The focus has tightened again, drawn back to the work at hand. A small, often overlooked point from trail life is that the later hours of the day require just as much attention as the morning, even though fatigue had begun to set in. Mistakes made at this stage could carry into the night, where they became harder to correct. You feel that fatigue now. It settles into your legs, into your back, into the small muscles that have been working without rest. It is not overwhelming, but it is constant, a quiet presence that does not fade. You adjust your seat, again seeking a brief moment of relief. It comes, but only slightly. Your horse exhales a long, steady breath that seems to match your own. The air carries a different scent now. The rain has brought out the smell of the earth, damp and rich beneath the dust that still lingers in places. It mixes with the familiar scent of cattle, of leather, of sweat, creating something that feels more grounded, more present. The herd begins to slow, not stopping entirely, but easing into a pace that suggests the end of the day is approaching. The riders at the front adjust their direction, guiding the animals toward a place where they can be held for the night. You follow the shift, turning your horse slightly to maintain your position. There is no clear signal, no announcement. The change happens gradually, understood rather than declared. A passing detail recorded in several journals mentions that cowboys often chose bedding grounds, carefully looking for areas with good visibility, access to water, and enough grass to support the herd overnight. The choice of location could influence how well both men and animals rested. You scan the land ahead. A gentle rise, open space. Enough room for the herd to settle without crowding too tightly. It feels suitable, though you are still learning what makes a place truly good for stopping. The cattle begin to gather more closely as they are guided inward. Their movement becomes circular, less directional, forming a loose shape that holds together without needing to be enclosed. You move along the outer edge, helping to maintain that shape, preventing strays from drifting too far. There are differing interpretations among historians about how structured these evening routines were, with some accounts suggesting a strict system, and others describing a more flexible approach shaped by conditions and experience. What you see now feels somewhere in between. Order but not rigidity. The sun lowers further. Its light turns golden, casting long shadows across the plains. The heat eases slightly, replaced by a softer warmth that feels almost welcome after the long hours of exposure. The herd settles, not completely still but calmer. The tension from earlier has faded, replaced by a quiet, steady presence. The animals shift occasionally, adjusting their positions, but the overall movement has slowed. You guide your horse to a stop. For a moment, you remain in the saddle, taking in the scene. The wide stretch of land, the low sounds of the herd, the fading light. Then you swing down. Your legs protest again, more strongly this time. The stiffness has deepened, settling in after the long day. You stand still for a moment, letting the sensation pass before moving. Around you, the others begin their own routines. Some move toward the wagon. Others check their horses' loosening gear, offering small moments of care that will help the animals recover for tomorrow. You remove your saddle, lifting it with practiced effort. It feels heavier now than it did in the morning, though. You know that is not truly the case. Fatigue changes perception, adding weight to everything. A quieter, less discussed aspect of cowboy life is how much the end of the day depended on repetition, on completing the same tasks with care even when energy was low. Skipping small steps could lead to larger problems later. You set the saddle down carefully. Your horse lowers its head, again resting. You run your hand along its neck, once more feeling the warmth, the steady presence that has carried you through the day. The light fades further. Shadows deepen. The sky begins its slow transition toward evening, and as the herd settles and the camp begins to form again, you feel the shift from motion to stillness, from effort to a quieter kind of endurance. The day is not quite over, but it is close. The light fades slowly, but the work does not end with it. As the sun slips lower, the colour of the land softens into gold, then into something quieter, more muted. The herd stands in a loose circle, shifting gently. The sound of their movement now slower, more measured. It would be easy to think this is the end of the day. It is not. Night brings a different kind of responsibility. You finish tending to your horse, running your hand along its side one last time before stepping back. It rests, but not fully. Like you, it remains where, ready to respond if needed. The chuck wagon fire is already being prepared. A small glow begins to grow, spreading outward as wood catches and settles into a steady burn. The smell of smoke returns, familiar now, wrapping itself around the camp in a way that feels almost reassuring. You move closer, drawn by both warmth and routine. Supper is simple. Beans again, a bit of meat, coffee, always coffee. You eat standing this time, too tired to bother finding a place to sit right away. The food fills you not with excitement, but with enough strength to continue. An observation often mentioned in accounts of trail life is that meals were valued less for variety and more for reliability. A steady supply of food, even if plain, meant stability in a life that offered very little of it elsewhere. You swallow the last of your meal and wipe your hands on your trousers. The sky above you deepens. The first stars begin to appear faint at first, then sharper as the light fades completely. The open plains, so exposed during the day, now feel vast in a different way, quieter, more distant. Someone calls out softly. It is not a command, but a signal, and time to set the night guard. A lesser-known detail of cattle drives is that cowboys took turns watching the herd through the night, often in shifts of a few hours each. The purpose was simple but critical, to keep the cattle calm, to prevent them from wandering, and to respond quickly if something startled them. You are assigned a shift, not the first, not the last, somewhere in between. You nod, acknowledging without needing further instruction. The system is understood. Each man takes his turn. Each man trusts the others to do the same. For now you have a brief stretch of rest. You gather your bedroll, unrolling it near the edge of the camp. The ground is firmer than it looks, but you are too tired to care much about comfort. You lower yourself down carefully, your body protesting the movement before settling. For a moment you simply lie there. The sounds of the herd reach you softer now, blending into a steady background. The fire crackles nearby. A few voices drift through the air, low and unhurried, then fade. Your eyes close briefly, but not fully. There is a sense of waiting, of knowing that this rest is temporary, that you will be called to stand again before the night has passed. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how cowboys coped with the irregular sleep patterns of trail life. Some accounts suggest they adapted quickly, learning to rest in short intervals. Others describe the strain it placed on both body and mind, especially over long drives. Lying here now, you can feel that strain beginning to take shape. You drift, but lightly. Time passes in a way that is difficult to measure. Then a voice, quiet but close, your name or something close enough to it. You open your eyes. The sky is darker now, filled with stars. The fire has burned lower, its glow reduced to a steady dim light. The air has cooled again, carrying the familiar chill of night across the plains. You sit up slowly. Your body feels heavier than before the brief rest, not quite enough to erase the fatigue, but it is enough to continue. You stand. Your legs respond, though not eagerly. You stretch slightly, easing the stiffness as best you can. Around you, most of the camp has settled. Shapes lie still beneath blankets. The quiet has deepened. You reach for your horse. It lifts its head as you approach, recognizing your presence, even in the low light. You saddle it again, the motion slower now, but still careful. Precision matters just as much at night as it does during the day. A small detail sometimes mentioned in personal accounts is that night work required a different kind of awareness, relying more on sound and instinct than on clear sight. Cowboys learn to listen closely to interpret the smallest changes in the herd's behavior. You mount up. The saddle feels familiar, though. Your body resists slightly before settling into place. You take the reins, guiding your horse toward the edge of the herd. The darkness changes everything. The cattle are no longer a clearly defined mass. Instead, they appear as shifting shapes, their movement indicated more by sound than by sight. The low murmur of their presence surrounds you, steady but not entirely predictable. You begin your slow circle. Around the herd, always moving, always watching. There is a rhythm to it. Your horse steps carefully, its pace, even its awareness sharp. You follow the outer line in maintaining a distance that keeps you close enough to respond, but far enough not to disturb the animals. You hum softly. Without thinking, it feels natural, almost necessary. A quiet little known practice recorded in several accounts is that cowboys often sang or hummed during night guard, not for entertainment but to soothe the herd. The steady sound helped keep the cattle calm, reducing the chance of sudden panic. Your voice is low, barely more than a breath, but it carries. The night deepens. The stars sharpen overhead. The air cools further, brushing against your face and hands. The fire behind you fades into a distant glow. You continue your circle, watching, listening, waiting. There remains debate about how often night guards successfully prevented major incidents compared to how often they simply reduced the risk. Some accounts emphasize their importance in avoiding stampedes. Others suggest that certain events could not be stopped once they began. Riding here now, it feels like a quiet effort against uncertainty. The herd shifts slightly. A small movement, a few animals stepping closer together. You adjust your path, your voice steady, your presence calm. The moment passes, but you remain alert, because out here in the quiet of the night, the line between calm and chaos is thinner than it seems, and it is your turn to hold it. The night holds steady for a while. Your horse moves beneath you in a slow, even rhythm, each step placed with care as you continue your circle around the herd. The darkness feels complete, now settled into every part of the land. The fire has faded into a distant glow, barely visible unless you turn to look for it. The cattle remain calm. Their low sounds drift through the air, steady and unbroken, like a quiet current that carries through the night. You listen closely, learning to separate the ordinary from the unusual. A soft shift here, a brief call there. Most of it means nothing. Some of it might. You keep humming. It's not a tune you recognize, not something you learn deliberately. Just a slow, repetitive sound that seems to match the movement of your horse. It fills the space around you in a gentle way, blending with the natural rhythm of the herd. A commonly noted point in trail recollections is that sound travelled differently at night on the open plains, often carrying farther and more clearly than during the day. This made quiet noises more noticeable and sudden sounds more disruptive. You become aware of that now. Every small noise stands out more sharply. The creak of your saddle, the soft press of hooves on earth, the distant call of something unseen beyond the herd. You continue your path, keeping your distance steady. Not too close, not too far. The balance remains important, perhaps even more so in the dark. Your horse flicks its ears again. You feel the motion through the reins, subtle but clear. It has heard something. You follow its attention, turning your head slightly, listening. For a moment there is nothing, then faintly a sound, not from the herd. Something else. A distant rustle carried on the cool night air. It fades almost as quickly as it appears, leaving only a trace of uncertainty behind. You keep your voice stead. Your humming does not stop. A small, less frequently mentioned detail in some accounts is that cowboys often relied on their horses to sense disturbances beyond human perception, trusting the animal's instincts when visibility was low. The partnership extended beyond movement into awareness itself. You guide your horse along the same path, resisting the urge to change direction too quickly. Sudden movement can create more trouble than it solves. The herd shifts slightly. A few animals lift their heads, their attention drawn toward the same distant space. The movement spreads in a subtle wave, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to be noticed. You angle your path, gently positioning yourself between the herd and the direction of the sound. Not blocking, not pressing, just present. Another rider appears on the far side, his shape barely visible against the dark. He has noticed it too. There is no call between you, no need to confirm. The shared awareness is enough. A line of interpretation among historians suggests that Night Guard relied heavily on this kind of unspoken coordination where riders responded to small changes without waiting for direct instruction. Others argue that more structured systems were sometimes used depending on the crew and the conditions. What you experience now feels quiet and fluid, shaped by necessity rather than rules. The sound does not return. Whatever caused it has moved on, or perhaps it was never as close as it seemed. The herd settles again, heads lower. Movement resumes its slow, steady pattern. The tension that briefly touched the edge of the group fades back into calm. You let out a breath. You had not realized you were holding it. Your horse relaxes slightly beneath you, its steps returning to their earlier rhythm. You follow the curve of your path, continuing the circle without interruption. Time moves differently at night. Without the sun to measure it, without clear markers to guide it, the hours stretch and fold in ways that are difficult to track. You ride, you listen, you wait. Each moment feels separate yet connected to the next in an unbroken line. Your thoughts drift, but not far. There is always something pulling you back. A sound, a shift. The constant need to remain aware even as fatigue presses more heavily against your focus. A lesser-known observation from personal journals is that Night Guard could feel both peaceful and tense at the same time, offering a quiet stillness that was broken only by the possibility of sudden disruption. You feel that balance now. The calm is real. So is the risk. The stars above you seem sharper than before, their light steady and distant. They do not change. They do not respond to what happens below. They simply remain, offering a kind of quiet backdrop to everything else. You adjust your position again, maintaining your distance. The path is familiar now, repeated enough times that your body begins to remember it without needing to think. Still you stay alert. Familiarity can lead to carelessness if you allow it. There continues to be discussion among researchers about how often night disturbances actually led to major events like stampedes, compared to how often they were resolved quietly as this one has been. Some accounts emphasize the danger, while others suggest that careful attention prevented most problems from escalating. Riding here, it feels like a quiet effort that works precisely because it does not allow things to grow. The air grows cooler. You feel it along your hands, your face, the small spaces where your clothing does not fully protect you. It is not uncomfortable, but it reminds you how much the temperature can shift once the sun is gone. Your shift continues. One circle becomes another. The herd remains steady, and as you ride through the quiet, listening to the low, constant sound of cattle and the soft rhythm of your own movement, you begin to understand how much of this life depends on moments like this. Unseen, unnoticed, but essential all the same. Your shift ends without announcement. It happens quietly the same way it began. Another rider approaches from the dim edge of the herd, his shape forming slowly out of the darkness. He gives a small nod, nothing more, and you understand. No words are needed. You guide your horse away from the circle, easing back towards the camp. The fire is little more than a low glow now, its warmth faint but still present. A few figures lie wrapped in their blankets, unmoving, lost in the kind of sleep that comes from deep exhaustion. The air feels colder than before, settling into the spaces between your clothes and your skin. You dismount slowly. Your legs feel heavier now than at any point during the day, the long hours of riding and the broken rest catching up with you all at once. You loosen the saddle, working through the familiar motions with less energy but the same care. A practical note found in several trail descriptions is that even after night duty, cowboys were expected to tend to their horses before resting again. The animal's condition directly affected the next day's work, so neglecting it was not an option. You rub your horse down briefly, your hands moving in slow, steady strokes. It stands quietly, accepting the attention without resistance. The warmth beneath its coat contrasts with the cool air around you, a small comfort in the dark. Once finished, you step back. The task is complete, at least for now. You gather your bedroll again, lowering yourself onto the ground with a quiet exhale. This time sleep comes more quickly. Not deep at first, but enough to carry you away from the constant awareness of the herd. Time passes. You do not know how much. Then light. Faint at first. A gradual return of grey along the horizon, the same quiet signal that the night is ending. You open your eyes slowly, your body already aware of what comes next even before your mind fully catches up. Morning again. A less frequently highlighted detail in trail life is how quickly one day blended into the next with little distinction between them beyond small variations in weather, terrain, or routine. The repetition shaped the experience, making time feel both long and compressed at once. You sit up, the stiffness returning almost immediately. It is deeper now, settled into your muscles in a way that feels familiar already. You stretch slightly, knowing it will not remove the discomfort, only ease it enough to continue. The camp begins to stir. The cook is already awake, tending to the fire, preparing the same simple meal that will begin the day. The smell of coffee returns, cutting through the cold air, drawing you forward. You stand brushing dust from your clothes. There is no point in trying to be clean. That idea has already faded from importance. Function matters more than appearance here. You move toward the wagon. The routine repeats: plate, food, coffee, quiet conversation. It feels almost identical to the morning before, and yet you notice small differences. A remark about the storm, a brief mention of the crossing, small acknowledgements that yesterday happened, even if the work continues unchanged. A small but telling detail recorded in some accounts is that cowboys often spent their wages quickly when they reached town, partly because daily life on the trail offered few opportunities to use money. The contrast between this routine and the brief bursts of spending later created a cycle that defined much of their experience. You take a sip of coffee. It tastes the same: strong, bitter, necessary. Your attention shifts to your gear again. The saddle, the straps, the rope. Each piece checked with the same care as before. Fatigue does not excuse mistakes. If anything, it makes attention more important. You lift the saddle. It feels heavier than it did yesterday, though you know it has not changed. Your body simply feels the difference now, carrying the accumulation of effort from the days before. You move toward the horses, the remuda weights shifting in the early light. You recognize more of them now, their shapes familiar, their movements easiest to read. You choose carefully, considering not just preference, but what the day might require. Some accounts suggest that experienced cowboys selected horses based on subtle traits matching temperament and endurance to the expected work ahead. Others indicate that choices were sometimes limited depending on the size of the remuda and the demands of the drive. Standing here, it feels like a mixture of both. You saddle your horse with practiced motions: blanket, saddle, cinch, each step completed with quiet precision. The animal responds calmly, its movements steady, as if it too understands the routine. You tighten the cinch, then check it again. There is no rush. The herd waits just beyond the edge of camp, its presence constant even when unseen. The work does not begin with a signal. It begins when you in and you are ready. You place your foot in the stirrup. For a brief moment you pause again as you did the morning before. Not out of hesitation but awareness. This cycle continues, day after day, the same actions, the same responsibilities. You swing up into the saddle. The leather creaks softly, the familiar sound marking the start of another long stretch of riding. Your horse shifts beneath you, adjusting to your weight. The sun begins to rise. Light spreads across the plains, revealing the herd once more. The shapes form, the movement begins, and the quiet of morning gives way to the steady rhythm of work. There is continuing discussion among historians about how cowboys perceived this repetition, whether it built resilience or wore down their sense of time and identity. Some descriptions emphasize endurance and adaptation, Others hint at a quieter fatigue that went beyond the physical. As you turn your horse toward the herd again, it feels like both might exist at once. You take a breath. The air is cool, but it will not remain that way for long. The herd begins to move, and you follow, already settling back into the rhythm that defines everything out here. The morning settles into motion once more, but something shifts in how you notice the people around you. Yesterday your focus stayed mostly on the herd on your horse on the ground ahead. Today your attention begins to widen. You glance more often at the other riders, not just as part of the line, but as individuals sharing this long stretch of work with you. A rider to your left sits low in the saddle, his posture relaxed in a way that suggests long experience. His hat is worn, its shape softened by time and weather. He does not speak much, but when he moves, it is with a kind of quiet certainty that draws your attention. Another rider further ahead laughs at something briefly, the sound carrying back before fading into the rhythm of hooves and wind. You begin to notice differences, not just in how each man rides, but in how they speak, how they carry themselves, how they respond to the small changes in the herd. A widely supported historical understanding is that a significant number of cowboys in the American West were not white Americans as often portrayed in later stories, but included black cowboys, Mexican vaqueros, and immigrants from various backgrounds. Their contributions shaped the practices and culture of cattle driving in ways that are sometimes overlooked. You see that diversity now, though it does not announce itself. It is simply there, in the accents that surface in quiet conversation, in the techniques used to guide a horse or manage a stray, in the small habits that each man carries with him, shaped by where he came from and what he learned before arriving here. A rider moves closer to you. He says something brief, a comment about the ground ahead, then gestures slightly with his chin. You follow his indication, noticing a patch of uneven terrain that might have caused trouble if left unmarked. You nod in return. The exchange is simple, but it carries weight. A less frequently highlighted detail in accounts of cowboy life is how much knowledge was shared informally, passed from one rider to another through small interactions rather than formal instruction. Skills moved across backgrounds, blending into a common approach shaped by necessity. You guide your horse carefully across the uneven ground. It responds without hesitation, adjusting its steps with precision. You trust it more now, relying on its awareness as much as your own. The herd continues forward, steady once again after the disturbances of the previous day. You glance toward the front. The riders there maintain their slow guiding line, their movements subtle but constant. Nothing about it looks dramatic, and yet everything depends on it. You begin to see the group as something more than a collection of individuals. It functions as a unit, each part connected to the others through shared effort. No one rider controls the herd alone. No one could. There is a line of thought among historians that suggests cowboy culture developed as a blend of different traditions, particularly drawing from Spanish and Mexican vaquero practices. Others emphasize the influence of American ranching methods and frontier conditions. The result as you experience it feels less like a single origin and more like a combination that has settled into its own identity. You adjust your reins slightly. Your horse shifts, keeping pace with the line. The movement feels easier now, less forced, as if your body has begun to accept the rhythm rather than resist it. The sun climbs again. Its warmth returns, though not as sharply as the day before. The air carries a light breeze, enough to move the grass and lift the edge of your shirt. Dust rises, but less heavily. The ground, still holding some moisture from the previous rain, keeps it closer to the surface. The air feels clearer, though the familiar taste never fully disappears. A rider behind you begins to hum softly. The sound drifts forward, blending with the steady noise of the herd. It is not meant to entertain. It simply exists, part of the background, part of the shared space. You find yourself listening, not to the tune, but to the presence of it, the way it fills the quiet without breaking it. A small, often overlooked observation is that cowboys develop their own forms of expression through music, stories, and habits, creating a sense of identity that helped carry them through the isolation of the work. You understand that more clearly now. The land stretches on, endless in its sameness, yet never entirely still. Each rise reveals another stretch. Each horizon gives way to another beyond it. You glance again at the riders around you. They are part of this landscape now, just as much as the herd, just as much as the horses and the dust and the sky. each one moving in quiet coordination, each one carrying his own story into this shared effort. There remains discussion among scholars about how these men viewed themselves, or whether they saw their work as temporary labour or as part of a lasting identity. Some accounts suggest many moved on quickly, seeking other opportunities. Others describe a deeper attachment to the life despite its hardships. Watching them now, it feels like both possibilities exist side by side. You shift in the saddle. The familiar ache returns, though it feels less surprising now. You have begun to expect it to carry it without questioning. Your horse flicks its ears, responding to a small movement along the herd's edge. You follow its attention, guiding your position just enough to maintain the line. The action feels natural, almost automatic. The work continues. Not faster, not slower. Just steady. And as you ride alongside these men sharing the same dust, the same heat, the same quiet understanding of what must be done, you begin to feel something else settle into place. Not comfort, but connection. A sense that you're no longer just observing this life. You are part of it. By the time the sun reaches its highest point again, you stop noticing clean and unclean as separate things. Everything has blended. Your shirt holds the salt of dried sweat from yesterday and the fresh dampness of this morning. Dust clings to the fabric, settling into the folds, into the seams, into places you cannot brush away. Your trousers feel heavier, not from weight alone, but from everything they have absorbed over time. Even your hands carry it. Leather, rope, horse, earth. The scents mix together until they form something constant, something that follows you no matter how often you wipe your palms against your clothes. A practical detail noted in many descriptions of trail life is that cowboys rarely had the opportunity to wash properly during long drives. Water was reserved for drinking and for the herd, making personal cleanliness a low priority compared to survival and efficiency. You feel that reality now in a way that is impossible to ignore. You shift in the saddle, adjusting your position again as the heat builds. Your clothes do not breathe the way you might wish. Wool, cotton, leather. They protect you from sun and wind, but they also hold in warmth, trapping it close to your body. Your hat shades your face. Without it, the sun would be nearly unbearable. With it, the heat becomes something you can manage, though not escape. The brim casts a narrow line of shadow that moves with you, a small but constant relief. A lesser-known point from historical accounts is that many cowboy clothing choices were shaped by practicality rather than style, with items like bandanas serving multiple purposes, such as filtering dust, protecting from sun, or even acting as a makeshift bandage when needed. You lift the cloth at your neck, pulling it briefly across your face. It helps with the dust, but only for a moment. The air carries too much of it, fine and persistent, settling into your mouth, your nose, the corners of your eyes. You blink, clearing your vision. The herd moves steadily ahead, its shape familiar now, its rhythm something you have begun to understand without needing to think about it. Your boots press against the stirrups. The leather is stiff, worn to the shape of your feet, yet still unforgiving. You feel every shift of your horse through them, every step transferred upward in small, steady motions. Your legs ache, not sharply but deeply, the kind of ache that builds slowly and stays. It has become part of the experience, something you carry without expecting it to disappear. A rider nearby adjusts his hat, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. The gesture is simple, but you recognize it immediately. The shared effort, the shared discomfort. It creates a quiet understanding between you even without words. A small but telling observation from personal journals is that cowboys often grew accustomed to these physical conditions to the point where they stopped remarking on them, treating discomfort as an ordinary part of the day rather than something worth noting. You begin to understand how that happens. At first, everything stood out. The dust, the heat, the stiffness. Now it blends together, forming a background that no longer demands your full attention. Your focus returns to the herd. A slight drift along the edge draws your eye. You guide your horse outward, correcting it with a gentle motion that feels almost instinctive now. The action is smooth. No hesitation, no overthinking. Kang, you return to your line. The sun presses down more firmly now, its warmth settling into the land, into your clothes, into your skin. Sweat forms again, tracing familiar paths, carrying dust with it. You reach for your canteen. The water inside is warmer than before, but you drink it anyway. Slowly, carefully, each swallow measured, each drop counted. There is a perspective among historians that suggests cowboy endurance was shaped less by extraordinary toughness and more by gradual adaptation, the body adjusting over time to conditions that would seem overwhelming at first. Others argue that many never fully adapted, simply enduring until the work ended. Riding here now, it feels like a mixture of both. You lower the canteen, securing it in place. Your horse exhales its breath steady, its pace unchanged. The partnership between you has settled into something quieter now. You no longer question each movement. You respond together, each adjustment flowing into the next. A breeze passes across the plains. It offers a brief relief, lifting the edge of your shirt, cooling your skin for just a moment before the heat returns. Small changes like this feel more noticeable, now more meaningful in the steady pattern of the day. You glance toward the horizon. Still distant, still unchanged. The sense of endless space remains stretching outward in every direction, giving little indication of how far you have travelled or how far you still have to go. You shift again in the saddle. The movement is slower, now your body conserving energy where it can. Every motion feels more deliberate, shaped by the need to continue rather than the desire to move freely. A rider further down the line coughs, then clears his throat. The sound carries briefly, then fades into the steady noise of the herd. Another small reminder. This environment affects everything. Your throat feels dry again, though you resist the urge to drink more. The balance between need and supply becomes clearer with each passing hour. You take a slow breath. The air is thick with the scent of sun-warmed earth, of animals, of leather and dust. It settles into you, becoming part of the experience rather than something separate from it. You guide your horse, once more adjusting to a subtle change along the herd's edge. The motion feels natural now, familiar. And as you ride on, carrying the weight of your clothes, the heat of the sun, the steady ache in your body, you begin to understand something that is rarely captured in stories. This life is not defined by a single hardship. It's defined by all of them layered together, constant, unremarkable on their own, but powerful in their accumulation. And you carry them with you one quiet mile at a time. The rhythm shifts again, though not in the way you expect. There is no long trail stretching ahead this time, no steady line pushing cattle across open ground. Instead, the movement tightens. The herd is gathered more closely, guided into a smaller space where direction matters less than control. You feel it easier immediately. The work changes from watching distance to managing closeness. Dust rises in thicker clouds, now stirred by tighter movement, by hooves crossing the same ground again and again. The air fills faster, clinging to your face, settling into your throat with a dry insistence that makes you swallow more often. You guide your horse along the edge of the group, but the edge itself feels different. Closer, more active, less forgiving. An often noted point in ranch records is that beyond the long drives, cowboys spent much of their time on tasks like sorting branding and separating cattle work that required precision in confined spaces rather than endurance over distance. You begin to see what that means. A small group of cattle is pushed slightly away from the rest. The movement is careful, deliberate, guided by several riders working together. One shifts inward, another angles from behind, while you hold your position just enough to keep the larger herd from closing the gap again. It feels like a quiet puzzle. Each movement affects the next. Too much pressure and the animals scatter. Too little and they drift back into the group. You nudge your horse forward, then pause. Timing matters. You wait for the right moment, then guide the animal beside you to close a small opening. The motion is smooth, almost unnoticed, but it helps hold the separation in place. A smaller, less frequently discussed detail in cattle work is that branding often required teams to coordinate closely, with some riders isolating animals while others handled them on the ground. The process depended on cooperation as much as individual skill. You hear the sound before you see it. A brief, sharp call. The rustle of movement as one animal is brought forward, held in place by practiced hands. The rest of the herd reacts slightly, shifting in response to disturbance. You remain steady. Your role is not to focus on the single animal but on the group, to keep the larger mass calm while the smaller task is completed. The smell reaches you next. Faint at first, then more noticeable: smoke, heated metal, the distinct scent of something being marked. Something changed in a way that cannot be undone. You do not look directly. You do not need to. The work continues around you, each man focused on his part, each movement contributing to the whole. A line of interpretation among historians suggests that branding practices were shaped as much by necessity as by ownership, creating a system that allowed cattle to be identified across vast unfenced ranges. Others point out the variations in technique and organization between different regions and outfits. What you see now feels practical, shaped by immediate need rather than theory. The herd shifts again. You respond quickly this time, guiding your horse into position without hesitation. A small group presses too closely, their movement threatening to collapse the space that has been created. You ease them back, not forcefully, just enough to suggest a boundary. They respond. The line holds. You feel a brief sense of satisfaction, though it passes quickly. There is no time to dwell on it. Your horse moves with you. Its steps precise, its awareness sharp. It responds to your smallest cues now as if it has learned your intentions as well as you have learned its movements. The dust thickens, then settles, then rises again. It coats your scarce, your clothes, the inside of your mouth. You no longer react to it the way you did before. It has become part of the environment, something expected rather than resisted. A rider nearby calls out briefly, coordinating the next movement. The words are short, direct, fading almost as soon as they are spoken. Communication here is efficient, shaped by the necessity rather than conversation. Another animal is separated, then another. The process continues, each step building on the last. A quieter observation found in some first-hand descriptions is that this kind of close work demanded a different kind of focus than trail riding, one that required constant attention to small changes and quick adjustments in tight spaces. You feel that difference clearly. There is less room for error here, less space to correct mistakes once they happen. You guide your horse again, turning it slightly to block a gap before it widens. The movement feels immediate, your body responding before your thoughts fully form. The herd settles, then shifts, then settles again. It is a constant pattern, never fully still, never entirely predictable. There remains ongoing debate about how standardized these practices were across different ranches and drives, with some accounts describing highly organized systems and others suggesting a more flexible approach shaped by individual experience. Standing here, it feels like structure and improvisation exist side by side. The sun presses down from above its heat, steady and unrelenting. Your shirt clings to your back, your hands feel dry despite the sweat. Your legs ache more sharply now, the constant adjustment adding a new layer to the fatigue. Still you continue, watching, guiding, holding the line. The work here is not about distance. It is about control. And as you move through it, responding to each shift, each small change in the herd, you begin to understand another part of this life. It demands something different from you, not just endurance, but precision, and you give it one careful movement at a time. The pace eases again, though the work never truly stops. By late afternoon, the tight movements of sorting give way to something more open. The herd spreads out slightly, no longer pressed together in close quarters, and the air begins to feel wide again, even if the heat still lingers across the land. You guide your horse at a slower walk, letting both of you settle after the more focused work. Your body feels it, a deeper kind of tired now, one that sits behind your shoulders and along your lower back. It does not ask for attention. It simply remains steady and unavoidable. The land ahead begins to show signs of change. A few structures appear in the distance, small at first, then more defined as you draw closer. Low buildings, fences, a scattering of movement that does not belong to the herd. People. You do not ride directly into it, but near enough to notice. A ranch house sits slightly apart from the others, its shape simple, its walls carrying the marks of weather and time. Nearby, a smaller building stands with its door open, a line of cloth hanging loosely to dry in the faint breeze. A figure moves in the doorway, a woman pausing for the moment as the herd passes at a distance. She watches not with surprise, but with familiarity, as if this is something she has seen many times before. A commonly accepted understanding is that While cowboy life is often described as isolated, it regularly intersected with ranch families, townspeople, and workers who supported the broader system of cattle raising and trade. The open range was not as empty as it sometimes appears in stories. You notice more details as you pass. A child stands near a fence holding onto the wooden rail, eyes fixed on the moving cattle. Another figure carries a bucket across the yard, moving with the same steady rhythm you have come to recognize in your own work. The moment is brief. The herd continues and you move with it, leaving the small cluster of buildings behind. But something about it stays with you. A less frequently discussed detail in accounts of the West is how much labor from women and families supported ranch operations, from cooking and cleaning to managing supplies and caring for animals, often without the recognition given to cowboys on the trail. You think about that as you ride. The work you do is visible in its own way, stretched across the land in long lines of movement. The work done in those buildings remains closer to the ground, quieter, but no less essential. A rider beside you glances back briefly toward the house, then forward again. No comment, just acknowledgement. The herd shifts slightly, pulling your attention back. You guide your horse into position, correcting a small drift along the edge. The motion feels familiar now, part of a pattern your body has learned to follow without needing to think through each step. The sun lowers further. Its light softens, casting a warmer tone across the plains. Shadows lengthen, stretching out beneath the cattle and across the ground. The heat begins to ease, though it does not disappear entirely. A faint breeze moves through again. It carries a different scent this time. Wood smoke, perhaps, from the distant buildings, mixed with the usual dust and grass. It fades quickly, but it marks the presence of others beyond your immediate space. There are differing perspectives among historians about how connected cowboys felt to these settled places, with some suggesting that they remained separate, moving from one drive to another, without forming lasting ties. Others describe moments of interaction that shaped their experience in quieter ways. Riding past now, it feels like a passing connection rather than a lasting one. You shift in the saddle. The movement is slower. Now your body conserving energy where it can. The long hours have settled into you, shaping the way you move, the way you respond. Your horse flicks its ears, reacting to a small sound from the herd. You follow its attention, adjusting your position just enough to maintain the line. The partnership feels steady, built from repeated moments of shared effort. The land opens again as the buildings fade behind you. Once more it is just the herd, the riders, and the wide stretch of plains. You take a slow breath. The air feels lighter, now cooler at the edges, carrying the first hints of evening. It settles into your lungs in a way that feels almost refreshing after the weight of the day. A small thoughtful observation found in some accounts is that cowboys often experienced brief moments of reflection during quieter stretches, where the repetition of the work allowed their thoughts to drift toward things beyond the immediate task. You feel that now. The image of the house, the child at the fence, the woman in the doorway, they pass through your mind quietly, then fade as your attention returns to the herd. The work continues, always, but these small glimpses remind you that the world beyond it still exists, even if you only touch it briefly. The sun dips lower, the light deepens, and as you ride on, guiding the edge of the herd through the softening glow of late afternoon, you carry both the weight of the work and the quiet awareness of everything that lies just beyond it. The light softens further as the day begins to close, and with it your thoughts begin to wander more freely. The herd moves at an easier pace, now guided toward another resting place, their energy fading along with the sun. The urgency of earlier hours has slipped away, replaced by something quieter, something that leaves space for your mind to drift. You follow the line almost without thinking. Your body knows what to do. Your horse responds to small shifts in weight, to gentle movements of the reins, to cues that no longer require conscious effort. The work continues, but it no longer fills every part of your attention. And into that space other things begin to rise. Memories, perhaps, or just fragments of thought shaped by the long hours and the steady rhythm of the trail. A widely observed aspect of cowboy life is the isolation it brought, with long stretches of time spent away from towns, family, and familiar surroundings. This distance created a mental landscape that could feel both expansive and empty at the same time. You feel that now. The land stretches endlessly around you, but your thoughts move elsewhere. to places you have known before, to voices that are not here, to moments that feel distant now, though they may not be so far away in time. A rider nearby begins speaking, not to you directly, but into the open space, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those close by. He tells a story, something from a previous drive, or perhaps something shaped by imagination. It is difficult to tell. The details are loose. A long ride, a difficult crossing, a moment that sounds larger than life. You listen, but only partly. A lesser noted detail in personal accounts is that storytelling played a quiet role in cowboy culture, offering a way to pass time, share experience, and sometimes reshape reality into something more manageable or entertaining. The story draws a few low responses, a chuckle, a brief comment, then it fades, replaced once again by the steady sounds of movement. You find yourself thinking about it anyway, not the story itself, but the way it was told. The way it filled the space for a moment, giving shape to something that might otherwise remain empty. The herd shifts slightly. You respond without hesitation, guiding your horse into position to correct a small drift. The motion is smooth, almost automatic now, your body moving before your thoughts fully form. You return to your line. The sun dips lower still, its light turning deeper, richer, casting long shadows that stretch across the plains. The heat eases, replaced by a cooler edge that begins to settle into the air. You take a slow breath. The scent of the land changes with the light, less sharp now, softer. The dust still lingers, but it feels less oppressive, less constant. There is a perspective among historians that suggests the mental experience of cowboy life was shaped as much by monotony as by hardship, with long hours of repetition, creating a space where thoughts could expand or become unsettled. Others emphasize the grounding effect of routine, suggesting it offered a kind of stability within an otherwise unpredictable environment. You consider that quietly. Both feel true. The repetition holds you in place, guiding your actions, keeping you moving forward. But within that structure, your mind moves freely, drifting between past and present, between what is here and what is not. Your horse flicks its tail, brushing away flies that have begun to thin as the temperature drops. You adjust your seat again, easing the pressure on your legs. The ache remains, but it feels different. Now, less sharp, more distant. The herd begins to gather more closely as the riders guide it toward the evening ground. The pattern repeats, slow movement, gradual tightening, a shift from motion to stillness. You follow along the edge, maintaining your position, ensuring that no animal drifts too far as the group settles. A small, easily missed observation from some journals is that cowboys often developed personal habits or rituals to pass time during these quieter moments, from humming to counting steps to repeating small motions that provided a sense of rhythm beyond the work itself. You notice your own. The way your hand rests on the reins, the slight movement of your fingers, the steady pace of your breathing. Simple things, but constant. The light fades further. The sky shifts from gold to a deeper shade, the first hints of evening settling in. The horizon softens the edges of the land, becoming less defined. The herd slows, then slows again, until finally it begins to settle into place. You guide your horse to a stop, watching as the movement around you eases into quiet. The animals shift, then still their presence, forming a steady, living shape against the fading light. There remains ongoing discussion about how cowboys perceived these moments of stillness, whether they brought relief or simply marked the transition to another kind of work. Some accounts describe a sense of calm. Others suggest the mind rarely fully rested, always aware of what might come next. You sit in the saddle for a moment longer. The day behind you, the night ahead. The space between them feels thin. You swing down slowly, your legs stiff, your movements careful. The ground feels different beneath your feet after so many hours of riding solid in a way that takes a moment to adjust to. Around you, the others begin to move, preparing, settling, repeating the same actions that will carry you into the next part of the cycle. You take a breath. The air is cooler now, softer against your skin. And as the last light of the day fades across the plains, you feel the quiet return, bringing with it both rest and the knowledge that it will not last for long. The evening settles in slowly, and with it comes a quieter kind of awareness. You move through the familiar motions again, tending to your horse, checking your gear, stepping back from the steady presence of the herd as it eases into rest. The routine feels almost automatic now, each action flowing into the next without the need for thought, and yet something in your mind feels more active than before. Perhaps it is the fading light. Perhaps it's the repetition of the days stacking one upon another in a way that begins to blur their edges. Or perhaps it's something else entirely. You lower yourself near the fire, its warmth returning in a softer, more controlled way than the harsh heat of the sun. The flames move steadily, casting small patterns of light that shift across the ground and the faces of those nearby. Conversation rises, then settles. A few remarks about the day, a quiet comment about the weather, nothing that lingers for long. But then something different. A rider begins to speak not about the work, but about how it is seen. Stories, he says, are already spreading. Back east. In towns you have not seen. In newspapers, in small printed pages that carry images and words shaped by people who have never ridden this land. The idea catches your attention. A documented trend from the late 19th century shows that the image of the cowboy began to take shape in popular culture even while the work itself was still ongoing. Dime novels, early journalism and travelling shows helped turn everyday labour into something larger, something more dramatic. You listen more closely now. The rider continues describing how cowboys are written about as fearless, as wild, as figures who move through danger with ease. His voice carries a hint of humour, though it is difficult to tell if it's amusement or something quieter. You think about your day, the early cold, the steady dust, the long hours of watching and waiting, the small, careful movements that kept the herd together. It does not feel like the story he describes. A lesser-noted detail in historical discussions is that many cowboys earned relatively low wages for demanding work, often around $30 to $40 a month during the height of cattle drives, a reality that contrasted sharply with the heroic image forming around them. You shift slightly, watching the fire. The flames move without concern for the stories told about them. They simply burn steady and real. You wonder briefly how something so ordinary becomes something so exaggerated. There are differing views among historians about how quickly the myth of the cowboy separated from reality, with some suggesting the transformation began almost immediately, while others believe it developed more gradually over time. Sitting here now, it feels like the two exist side by side. The real work continues, the stories grow elsewhere. A rider nearby laughs softly, adding his own version of events to the conversation. His words stretch the truth just enough to make it more interesting, more memorable. You recognize it, the same way the earlier story on the trail shifted and expanded as it was told. It is not exactly false, but it is not exactly true either. You lean back slightly, resting your hands against the ground. The sky above you deepens the stars, beginning to return one by one. The open space feels familiar now, less overwhelming than it once did. You take a slow breath. The air is cooler, carrying the scent of smoke and earth, of animals and night. A quieter observation found in some writings is that cowboys themselves sometimes contribute the myths about their lives, shaping their own stories in ways that made the hardships easier to carry, or the experiences more meaningful. You consider that. Perhaps the stories are not only for others, perhaps they are also for the ones living them. The herd shifts slightly in the distance, its presence constant even in the dim light. The sound reaches you low and steady, a reminder that the work continues beyond this moment of rest. You glance toward it, then back to the fire. The conversation fades again, replaced by a quiet that feels more complete than before. The day has been long, the night will bring its own demands. You feel the fatigue settle more deeply now, not just in your body, but in your thoughts. A kind of heaviness that softens the edges of everything, making it easier to let go of the details, to drift into something less defined. There remains ongoing discussion about how cowboys themselves viewed the growing legends around them, whether they embraced them, ignored them, or simply had no time to consider them at all. As you sit here, it feels like the answer might change from one man to another. You push yourself up slowly. The fire continues to burn, the herd continues to breathe, the night continues to settle. And the stories, whether spoken here or written somewhere far away, continue to grow. You take one last look at the open land around you. It feels both familiar and distant at the same time. And as you prepare to step back into the rhythm of the night, you carry with you a quiet understanding. This life in all its steady, unremarkable detail will not be remembered exactly as it is. But you know what it feels like, and that is something no story can fully change. The night settles once more, and this time you feel it more fully. Not just as a change in light or temperature, but as a quiet closing of the day itself. The work has been done, at least for now. The herd rests, the riders move more slowly. Even the wind seems to soften as it crosses the open land. You sit near the edge of the camp, not quite at the fire, not quite in the dark. Somewhere in between, your body feels heavy in a way that goes beyond simple fatigue. It is not pain, not exactly. It is a deep, steady weight built from hours of movement, attention, and repetition. Your hands rest loosely in your lap, your shoulders lowered. You're breathing slower now. The day begins to fade behind you. Not in sharp memories, but in impressions. The sound of hooves, the taste of dust, the slow pull of the reins, the shifting light across the plains. Each piece settles quietly, becoming part of something larger. A well-grounded historical observation is that by the late 19th century, the open range system that supported long cattle drives was already beginning to change, shaped by the spread of barbed wire railroads and new forms of land management. The life you are living, as constant as it feels, exists within a moment that will not last forever. You consider that, but only lightly. The future feels distant from here. What matters now is the ground beneath you, the quiet presence of the herd, the low glow of the fire that still holds against the dark. A small, less commonly emphasized detail is that many cowboys did not remain in this work for long periods, often moving on after a few seasons, drawn by new opportunities or simply worn down by the demands of the life. You wonder briefly how long you might stay. The thought does not settle. It drifts like so many others, passing through without needing an answer. There are differing interpretations among historians about whether the cowboy era ended quickly or faded gradually, with some pointing to specific events that marked its decline, while others describe a slower transition shaped by economic and environmental changes. Sitting here now, it feels less like an ending and more like a moment suspended in time. The fire crackles softly, a small shift of wood, a brief rise of sparks, then stillness again. Around you the camp grows quieter, voices fade, movements slow. One by one the riders settle into their own spaces, their shapes lowering to the ground, wrapped in blankets that offer what little comfort they can. You remain where you are a moment longer, watching, listening. The herd breathes in the distance, a low, steady presence that never fully disappears. It is a sound you have come to recognize, to rely on in its own way. You take a slow breath. The air is cool now, carrying none of the weight of the day. It feels lighter, easier, as if the land itself has relaxed. Your eyes begin to close, not fully at first, just enough to soften the edges of what you see. You shift slightly, lowering yourself onto your bedroll. The ground meets you with its familiar firmness, but it feels different now. Not harsh, not uncomfortable, just steady. You pull the blanket closer. The warmth gathers slowly, settling around you as the cool air continues to move above. The balance feels right enough to ease you without fully separating you from the world around you. Your thoughts begin to drift. The herd, the riders, the long stretch of land that has carried you through the day. They move through your mind more slowly now, less defined, as if they are beginning to dissolve into something softer. There is a quiet understanding that settles in. This life, with all its repetition, its quiet demands, its steady rhythm, does not need to be dramatic to be meaningful. It exists in these moments, in the slow rise of the sun, in the careful movement of the herd, in the quiet circle of riders under the night sky. You feel your breathing deepen, slower now, more even. The sounds around you soften, blending into a single steady presence that carries you further away from the sharp edges of the day. The fire fades, the stars remain, and you rest. Now, as the night settles fully and your body begins to let go of the long day, you allow yourself to drift a little deeper into that quiet space. The ground beneath you feels steady, holding you without effort. The blanket rests lightly across your body, just enough to keep the cool air from pressing too closely. Around you the camp has grown still. The last movements have faded, the last voices have quieted. Only the soft sounds remain, the distant breathing of the herd, the occasional shift of a hoof against the earth, the faint whisper of wind moving across the open plains. You do not need to follow each sound anymore. You simply let them exist. Your body loosens piece by piece. The tension in your shoulders eases. The weight in your legs softens. Even the small, constant awareness you have carried throughout the day begins to fade, replaced by something gentler, a kind of quiet. The sky above, though you no longer look at it, stretches endlessly, filled with distant light that does not demand your attention. It is simply there, steady and calm. You breathe in slowly, then out. There is nothing more you need to do. No movement to guide, no line to hold, no sound to interpret. Just rest. The day has passed. The work is done. And for this moment, that is enough. So you settle into the stillness, letting it carry you gently as the plains grow quiet and the night wraps softly around everything. Sweet dream. Dream.